What is up, everybody? It is your boy Evan. Goodness gracious, y'all don't realize how much I love all 11 of y'all. Because boy man, I tried to record this video earlier, had some technical difficulties, and I hate re-recording stuff because I want my reaction to be genuine. I want you to be there with me as I'm reading it, as I'm hearing it, and hearing my real first thoughts. I think there's a lot of value to that. I think too many people do the re-record, polish thing. Like, the only thing I'll ever re-record is my intro if I say it weird. Besides that, it's all in, baby. I might snip out the ums and the whats and the you knows. Not all the you knows. I like saying you know. Like that. That is something I would normally cut out, but I'm not going to just for the sake of this. I had to re-record this video, but I'm doing it as a gesture of love, as a gesture of respect for the subject matter. So I was asked by a friend over on Instagram, and check out my Instagram if you haven't already. I'm pretty sure you probably coming here from Instagram, but you probably noticed I recently switched. I'm no longer Rizpublican. I am now just Evan J. Trevino, keeping it to the name, a bit more professional, a bit more poised, as the young ladies say, very mindful. And I feel like it also matches my branding a little better because the YouTube channel that I'm growing, this YouTube channel is Evan Trevino TV. So having it sent around my name, sent around my brand, I feel like that would be great. Anywho, my friend from Instagram requested that I talk about this conflict, more specifically the comments that Marco Rubio made regarding possible escalation of this conflict. But before we do that, I would like to peer into the situation. What are the nuances of it? What is the background of the Armenia and Azerbaijani conflict? Azerbaijani, that is how you say that. So I have this video provided from Al Jazeera English, which is sponsored by the Qatari government. And now normally I'm not a big fan of federally sponsored media, but the difference with this is that Qatar has a very specific and express stance of neutrality regarding this conflict. There's a lot of different nations that have taken a side, or at the very minimum have leaned more towards a side, but Qatar, that's not the case. They are very adamant about staying neutral to this. Them and like many other nations, they just want to see a peace agreement blossom from this, but they're not leaning any which way. So I feel like they're in a special position to kind of explain this conflict in a very neutral manner. But before we do that, please bro, like, comment, subscribe. If you'd like to, share it with a friend. If you got any Armenian homies that wanted to hear about more of what's going down in the motherland, by all means. But I would really appreciate it. It would help the channel tremendously. You know, the funny thing about Armenians is that I kind of got like a weird like backwards racism with them, because I've never been done wrong by Armenian. Every single Armenian person I know has been cool as hell to me. They are very chill people. They're very hard workers. They are almost always super successful or related to successful people, and that is just a indicator of their nature and their culture. And I have a tremendous respect for hard workers, bro, especially people that bring themselves up from the bottom. You know, nothing to something, rags to riches type things, American dream in here. On top of that too, Armenian women, beautiful, bro. You know, what is there not to love about the Armenian people, as far as in my own anecdotal experience? But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video, learn more about this conflict.
Let's talk about a mountain territory that people are killing each other over. It's called Nagorno-Karabakh, and the fights between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
A flare-up of one of the world's oldest conflicts is raising fears of all-out war.
Soldiers and civilians are being killed.
Life has moved underground in Stepanakert.
That's another thing too. I'm not sure what's going on with YouTube right now, but the frames are freezing in between videos. I'm not sure how I can fix that, but the audio should still be going, so you may just have to wait for the picture to catch up. My apologies ahead of time.
Once the machine of war has started, it gets incredibly dangerous. These two sides have very long-range weapons.
So why are they fighting? How long has it been going on for? And why are countries like Turkey involved? The first shots were fired in July before all-out war broke out at the end of September. It's been the worst fighting there in 25 years, but the grievances go back generations. At the heart of the dispute is a region called Nagorno-Karabakh, and here it is in a crowded neighborhood known as the South Caucasus. Nagorno-Karabakh lies entirely within Azerbaijan's borders. It's internationally recognized as being part of the country, full stop. Here's the thing, it's controlled by ethnic Armenians, backed by Armenia. And surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh are lands that Armenia controls. The UN calls it an occupation. Then you've got all the big neighbors, like Iran, which borders both. Turkey, it's long been an ally of Azerbaijan. And then there's
You gotta be taking things with a little grain of salt of anything that comes from the United Nations. In recent years, they've kind of become just a mouthpiece for Muslim nations that have kind of packed that grouping. That's why we don't really rock with them too much. America's not that much interested in the United Nations. So I would just take what they say with a grain of salt. That whole occupation thing, that's not recognized necessarily in the same vernacular as other nations recognized that area.
There's Russia. It supplies weapons to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. We'll get into all the geopolitics later, but first, here's what Nagorno-Karabakh looks like. It makes up 5% of Azeri territory, but almost twice that much land around it is controlled by Armenian forces. About 150,000 people live here. It holds its own elections and governs itself.
So when a client comes to us with an ask to launch an influencer marketing campaign, the process is pretty streamlined. So what we'll do is we'll get into the Popular Pays platform.
But right now, it's a war zone. Many people are living in their basements because of the shelling, and local officials say half the people who live there have been forced to leave. The thing about this region is that it's been fought over for a long time. Iran had control in the mid-18th century, then the Russians took over. The British and the Ottomans were in there too. But a key date in all of this is 1920. That's when Armenia and Azerbaijan went to war over Nagorno-Karabakh, and Azerbaijan, backed by Russia, got control. A year later, it was promised to the Armenians, but Stalin turned around and made sure Azerbaijan held on to it. By 1988, the Soviet Union was crumbling, and the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh took advantage of the power vacuum and voted to join Armenia. So when the Soviet Union finally fell apart in 1991, so did whatever was left of peace in the South Caucasus.
What the collapse of the Soviet Union did was then to militarize this conflict. Both sides suddenly got much bigger weapons.
1992 was when the fighting really intensified, right after Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh declared independence. Both sides accuse each other of atrocities. Tens of thousands of local Azeris and Armenians were killed. 1 million people had to leave their homes. In the end, the Armenians pushed Azerbaijan's forces out of Nagorno-Karabakh, seized territories around it, and it all finally ended in a ceasefire in 1994.
I find it super interesting with recent history. Like, I was born in 97. I'm a 97 baby. And when I think about these conflicts and how close they are to us, but I am just a few years removed from being alive from there, and maybe a decade away from really grasping the situation. This is recent history, and you don't learn about this in public schools, even though it has a lot of implications in the life that you're going to live as an adult. There's a huge Armenian population here in the United States, and knowing the context behind that mass migration of people, I think, is important. You begin to develop a little more respect for the people and what they've gone through.
That ceasefire has been ignored by both Armenia and Azerbaijan over the years. And the sense of injustice over what happened in that war, the killings and mass displacement, hasn't gone away.
This conflict has always been kind of put on the back burner. There's always the danger of some terrible incident causing a new escalation, in which case things could get totally out of control given the huge amount of weaponry we have on both sides.
And now, both sides are tapping into that anger. It's full-scale war all over again. Trenches, tanks, air attacks.
Air raid sirens wailed across this city as a barrage of rockets and mortars rained down.
Azeri forces have been attacking Nagorno-Karabakh's main city, Stepanakert. Armenian men there have been signing up to fight back. Exact numbers are next to impossible to come by, but soldiers and civilians on both sides have been killed. Armenian forces have been attacking Azerbaijan too. The border city of Ganja has been among the hardest hit.
The second rocket hit the other street, and there are also 2 other wounded people over there.
So how and why did the fighting start up again? The answer depends entirely on who you ask. Armenia says Azerbaijan attacked first. Azerbaijan says it acted in self-defense. What's clear is that it's not exactly an even fight. Our colleagues at AJ Labs put together these infographics to show just how much more Azerbaijan spends on its military, how many more soldiers it has, and how much more artillery.
You know, just to touch on that, I think one of the things about being a sovereign nation is that you really can't put a price tag on your national defense, on your key interests like that. Especially as a superpower such as the United States. Like, a lot of people criticize how much we spend on the military. That is what allows us to be the United States. You think it's our domestic policy? No. You think it's our culture? Nah. It's not even our constitution. It's our military, which allows us to maintain our constitution, allows us to maintain the ever so sweet fruits of this land we call America. And when you don't have a strong military, you have a tough time maintaining your will, let alone enacting your will. I think it's very important to recognize that being outspent in the military is essentially meaning that you are submitting to another person's will if they so choose to enact it. You find yourself in a very vulnerable and precarious situation when you're being outspent by adversarial nations on your military. And that's why we spend so much on the military, guys. So stuff like this can never happen to us. But never say never, because life has a very funny way of making the impossible possible.
And the Azeris have been showing it off. This is an actual music video released by the Azeri military. The Armenians are rallying their people too. But what's making this particular fight different from all the other skirmishes is that other countries are getting involved in a big way.
Azerbaycanlı kardeşlerimizin işgal altındaki topraklarını kurtarma ve vatanlarını koruma mücadelelerinde yanlarında olduğumuzu belirtmek istiyorum.
Part of Turkey's connection to Azerbaijan is cultural. The Azeris are a Turkic-speaking people.
We call ourselves one nation, two states. What happens there, of course, is of direct concern to us. It affects, our borders. It affects our region.
It's got the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh looking for outside help too.
If there is also a direct involvement of Turkey, and I don't see that Turkey is going to pull out from the region, we have to somehow, change some geopolitical approaches of our state, further strengthen our relations with brother countries, Russia, United States, Iran, and China.
Yo, and I really want to touch on that for a second, right? Usually with a lot of situations, both in your anecdotal individual life and larger societies, corporations, countries, birds of a feather will flock together. But that is very much not the case with Armenia, man. They got a mixed basket. They are the table of homies at lunch that have like one person from every different type of friend group all just there, kind of like a mini United Nations of the high school, you feel me? Because Armenia is linked up with Russia, the United States, Iran, and China. Most of these guys adversarial to each other in one way or another. That is some wacky business, But those are powerful friends to have. Another thing too that they touch on is how a lot of other nations are kind of looking over the situation and trying to quell it. If we've learned anything from the India and Pakistan conflict, which has a lot of similarities between the two, in the sense that it's two nations fighting over a region that both have some type of claim to. Oh, this area is within our borders. Oh, well, this area also has a mostly Armenian population with an Armenian culture. Like, there's a lot of different claims and arguments made on both sides that I find very interesting. And most nations just don't want to deal with it. So they try to get ceasefires and pacts. And it's like band-aid over band-aid over band-aid over band-aid. Doesn't actually resolve in the long term. It just kind of sits, festers, smolders until it's ready to pop again. And then everyone's real quick to kind of just tap out the flames, put the blanket over it, and not actually remove that smoldering or address the root causes of this issue. But then again, it's not their responsibility either. And we're going to hear Marco Rubio kind of touch on that, right? You know, this isn't the age of the neocons. This isn't your grandpa's GOP. This isn't your grandma's GOP. This isn't the old way of governance where we step into nations with a size 12 foot, leave our treads everywhere, and try to sweep them up as we walk. This is the age of America first. Our main concern is America and her interests, but our interests do coincide with the peaceful world. So we may console these nations, we may act as a mediator between these nations, but we are long removed from the age of direct intervention to stabilize a region. We're not in the business of nation building, and we're not that good at it either. The only times we've really successfully done that was with Germany, who arguably already had a westernistic culture, and Japan, who was essentially running from their past identity and were more willing to evolve culturally. Aside from that, there's several nations that we've tried to nation build with. We just suck at it. And a part of it is we don't recognize the culture and the people there that are largely unwilling to leave their culture. I mean, it's theirs, right? For better, for worse. That's them. That's their identity.
So how involved is Turkey in the actual fighting? Well, that's difficult to pin down. Azerbaijan's using military drones supplied by Turkey and Israel. And Turkey's accused of recruiting Syrian fighters to help against the Armenians, which Turkey and Azerbaijan flatly deny.
There is no evidence of the so-called Syrian fighters going to Azerbaijan or facilitated by us. There is evidence of Lebanese Armenian individuals, I guess, or militia, going there.
So what's in it for Turkey and Azerbaijan, beyond trying to get back what they see as Azeri land? Well, something to consider is that this region is rich in oil and gas. Pipelines snake across the region. Oil and gas make up 90% of Azerbaijan's exports. And as for Turkey, Azerbaijan is now its biggest supplier of natural gas. So understandably, any instability here is bad for business all around. Azerbaijan accuses the Armenians of attacking a major oil pipeline, which Armenia denies. One thing's for sure, Azerbaijan's oil and gas has come in handy.
That's given Azerbaijan the revenues to build up a new army after it.
So that's another interesting thing, right? So if you guys are familiar, there's this concept called dime theory that they teach in the military. And Colonel Alan West talks about this when he goes visits campuses. And it's the idea that you can use your country's diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economics as modalities to influence other countries to accomplish your political goals. And one thing that ties that theory or that model to this is that the selling of oil is often used by nations to finance the bolstering of their military. You've seen that in 2017, one of the reasons why we had such a peaceful term where Russia didn't invade Ukraine, where new wars weren't started in the Middle East, is because America was outproducing and outperforming a lot of other nations in oil production, especially out of Texas. Texas was pumping it out. When we go and take over a market, the market doesn't expand. There isn't increased amount of buyers. So if the market's staying the same, but we're increasing our production, we're undercutting a lot of other businesses, a lot of other nations. If Russia can't sell oil, they can't afford to build up their military to invade Ukraine. If Iran can't sell oil, they can't afford to fund these proxies and start wars in neighboring countries against Kuwait, against Israel, against Bahrain. So using our economic factors in the dime theory, which would be our capability to produce and sell oil at a cheaper rate and at a more efficient cost, American oil, it burns cleaner. According to a Department of Energy report that was done under the Biden administration, and they don't like oil, mind you, they don't like oil. But even their report showed that the amount of soot and hydrocarbons that our oil releases in comparison to European coal, to Middle Eastern oil, to Chinese oil, to Russian oil, our oil burns cleaner. It still leaves some hydrocarbons in the air, of course, it's oil, but it is cleaner. So wrapping that all together, them selling oil and making that their main export totally makes sense. They were using that money to bolster up their military, and that's indicative of a lot of different regimes that you see around the world that have plans of expansion or conflict.
Had lost a humiliating defeat back in the 1990s.
The other reason Turkey and Azerbaijan say they support the offensive on Nagorno-Karabakh is that they think the dispute has been allowed to fester, and now is the time to resolve it once and for all.
Our main concern is to find a diplomatic solution to this. But as I said, for this peace to be sustainable, it needs to be based on a plan to end the occupation.
It's true that over the years, there have been lots of negotiations. The UN's put out a bunch of resolutions to stop the fighting, and all the big international organizations have weighed in too, including something called the Minsk Group, led by Russia, France, and the United States.
You know, the thing about other nations trying to step in and solve other people's problems, and while it has good intentions, is that no one wants to fucking hear that, dog. Like, no one wants to be kind of talked down to because you can't handle your own crap. Even if that may or may not be true, no one wants to hear that. And a lot of times, nations don't heed to that. There's this concept of anarchy, and I'm not talking about chaos anarchy, but anarchy in the sense that there is no supreme authority in the grand scheme of this earthly world. God hasn't came back yet. So in this earthly world, there is no supreme authority. The United States likes to pretend that we are, but we can't be everywhere at once, and we can't enforce everything. Otherwise, we would just rule the planet. So in this state of anarchy, might makes right. Being strong enough to impose your will and repel other people's wills is the way of the world. And other nations just don't take too kindly to people trying to encroach and dictate their will. It just doesn't work. It works in a society maybe because you have mechanisms to enforce that will. But short of sanctioning and invading a country, what are you going to do? And even then, sanctions are merely a measure to help influence that decision. Sanctions don't create decision making right off the rip. What it does is it presents a situation to the sanctioned country saying, hey, you're going to feel some pain if you continue to do this. But ultimately, they could still make the decision to keep to do it. If sanctions just made nations act a certain way, no matter what, North Korea would be a constitutional republic, but that's just not the case, right? So all in all, in this state of anarchy that is the grand scheme of the world, you can't really get countries that don't want to get along to get along.
They came close to getting the two sides to agree on a peace plan in 2007, but it fell apart.
The two sides basically never really fully accepted that plan. They were always looking to see if they could just improve their options.
But like all the other plans so far, they failed to overcome that deep mistrust.
Ateşkes olmasın, onlar da reddolup geçsin, koysun Azerbaycan halkı dinmez dolansın. Ayrı bir şey istemirik.
A ceasefire is good, certainly good, but the problem must be solved. A ceasefire must solve the problem, that is our independence.
One can completely understand the Armenians saying that we are the majority population. We've lived here for centuries. We're surrounded by Armenian churches and cemeteries, and we don't trust Azerbaijan to rule over us. And you can also completely understand Azerbaijan saying to take away Nagorno-Karabakh is to kind of tear a massive chunk out of the middle of our territory, and that's completely unacceptable.
Both sides accuse each other of terrible things: massacres, ethnic cleansing, and taking land. So it's hard to make peace. Ceasefires only pause the fighting, they don't resolve it. And history has shown that.
So that was a very informative video. I hope that you guys feel caught up, or at least kind of caught up with this conflict. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances, but this will at least give you an idea so we can have a more holistic picture before going into this, right? So Marco Rubio, during a Senate hearing, he gave the confirmation essentially that the United States has a vested interest in preventing the invasion of Armenia, which would be a continuation of this conflict. It's actually going to be Representative Smith that brings up that there are prisoners being held by Azerbaijan and that those Armenians deserve human decency. The conditions they're being kept in isn't great. And Marco Rubio is basically going to reaffirm that, hey, our priority is preventing more war, preventing an escalation, preventing an invasion. But if we can also improve the quality of life with these people living here, then we're going to aim to do that as well. So without further ado, let's hear it straight from Marco Rubio.
I had a hearing on Ali.
That's not Marco Rubio, obviously.
Aliyev and Azerbaijan on the Tom Lantos Commission. And it's very clear that after the genocide committed by Aliyev against the Armenians, that there are many, many political prisoners and POWs being held. I would just encourage you to do whatever you can to get those men and women released, at least 300. I met with Aliyev twice in Baku. He's a dictator. You know, I know we work with dictators and we have to have at least some kind of conversation with them, but release those prisoners. They're being maltreated and horribly mistreated by Aliyev, so I would ask for that. Secondly, you know, you and I have worked on issues like forced organ harvesting. You and Tom Cotton were the prime sponsors of a bill on the Senate side. 2 weeks ago, we got the bill passed here again. It is a horrific human rights abuse by Xi Jinping, targeting the Uyghurs, of course, the Muslim Uyghurs, because those organs are being sold in the Middle East. So they want to have livers that are coming from a Muslim. So the market is very, very high, livers and other internal organs. And Xi Jinping is making billions by killing tens of thousands of young people, average age.
Maybe I should make a video about the Uyghurs. I feel like there's so much going on in the world at once that it's hard to really keep tabs on everything. But I feel like it's for that reason that I should make the video. You know, the average person that's just kind of like, they care, but they have their own life, right? They got work, they got kids, they got a significant other, they got payday loans, they got other things going on in their life. They don't have the time to really just sift through all this information and be as passionate for all of it, right? There are priorities that take place in our life. And I feel like at least being privy to what's going on in the world, right? At least having those things in mind and being able to pray for all of them, that goes up and beyond for the average person. Now, if you're an activist or you're an advocate, knowing it is just the first half of the battle. But at least knowing what's going on in the world will allow you to focus your energy in what you feel the most passionate about. So yeah, I think in the future I'm going to make a video about the Uyghurs.
28 each and every year, Falun Gong, and you know it, you're the sponsor of the bill. I would appeal to you if you could. It passed the House 406-1. If we could get it out of the Senate, it would hopefully clamp down on this egregious human rights abuse in China. And it's a global bill. It would outlaw forced organ harvesting profoundly with real penalties up to 20 years in prison for those who are part of that supply chain. But it would most directly affect Xi Jinping and the people who are doing this horrific abuse. I yield.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. On obviously the organ harvesting, China plays a concerning role in that regard, and we would obviously be helpful in any way we can in helping you pass that in the Senate, certainly putting a good word for it and the like. But it's not limited to China, unfortunately. There are other parts of the world where we're now seeing that, and there are places where we're trying to verify, but we hear reports of that. And that's something that's need to be called out as well. As far as Azerbaijan is concerned, our core focus has been on trying to establish a peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. There's a real risk there of a conflict that we're trying to prevent from happening. Our teams have been very engaged in that regard and trying to make something come about and prevent an armed intervention there that would, and obviously within the context of those conversations. The issues you raised about prisoners and human rights are critical to it. And again, another example of where we want to use our embassies. So when we talk about people will complain, well, you got rid of the Human Rights Office and the functional bureaus, it's because it's being transferred to the regional bureaus. And our regional bureaus will not just have a focus on human rights within the bureau, but so will our embassy. And so that is the human rights issue with regards to Azerbaijan, and so that is what our embassy will be focused on pushing. It's different from what the human rights issue might be in another part of the world, but we think it's important to have people on the front line prioritizing these issues as part of our holistic approach. You've outlined it correctly. We do want to have, we may not agree with the system of government, we may wish it were different, but the truth of the matter is that we have to deal with countries in many cases that perhaps don't have ideal models, but we have to deal with them in our national interest.
And that's another thing that I love about Marco Rubio's approach to this, right? And Trump's approach to this, for that matter. It's that we are no longer in that neocon age, as I mentioned before. We don't go in, fuck everything up, and call it nation building. We recognize these people have a right to govern themselves, and that we should only really get involved when our interests are at stake or egregious human rights violations are taking place. And even then, the way we go about it isn't direct intervention. We go about it through diplomacy. We go about it through non-conventional means. And I mean non-conventional in the sense of non-militaristic means. There's a lot of ways to accomplish stuff, and boots on the ground isn't always the answer. In fact, that should always be the last thing we do. So I really like that approach. We recognize that even if a country may have unsavory leadership or a certain model of government we don't really enjoy, we can still work with them to create a better living environment for all parties involved.
And we need to balance all of these things together, our national interest and diplomacy, without surrendering and finding opportunities to further interests such as human rights. And Azerbaijan provides us an opportunity to do that in the context of the broader peace that we're trying to establish there.
So as you've seen there, Marco Rubio confirms that our main priority is preventing any further escalation, which includes an invasion into Armenia. I completely wholeheartedly agree that that should be our priority, but he also voiced that if in the same vein we're able to address some of these human rights abuses that are taking place as far as the Armenian prisoners from past conflicts, then that also could be addressed. But we need to do it in a way that doesn't stir the pot even more and push them into further escalation, because that's just going to hurt even more people, and that does nothing to help the prisoners, right? Anyways, guys, that is the video. If you found this informative, entertaining, or somewhere in between, please comment, like, subscribe. If you didn't like it, dislike it. Hey, let me know what I'm doing wrong, right? But if you share it, I would greatly appreciate that. Obviously, no expectation to share it, but please like, comment, subscribe, helps out the channel. With that, I am out. Catch you later.